Every state is there.
Okay, well, yeah,
No, but yeah, unforeseen conditions in
Okay.
old buildings, you could spend.
all right, we are back, and I think we've all received a copy. And I'm pretty sure it's on, is it online today? It is on the website of a proposal of the Superintendent's Association on how we might want to proceed forward. I think we all know, at least any of us that are looking at it, that we are not going to have time to get this entire educational transformation process done, outlined, thought through before we get out of here, hopefully before the 4th of July. We were told at caucus today that we might get out by the end of May if we, with the exception of the veto session, if we can reach a point where we're comfortable at having a yet to be named groups, something that will do work in the interim between now and whenever we meet next, depending on federal budgeting decisions. When we meet next could be as early as September, maybe October, because we are one of the states that gets more back from DC than we send out. So
Yes.
we are vulnerable.
Just for clarity, because I was not at the caucus, so a group that will meet in the off session to work on governance or finance or both?
I think both, because finance does somewhat follow the governance structure. But this is all, there's been discussions between both leaderships and the governor is all I know.
Okay.
Details yet to be worked out. This is a proposal with some details. So I thought we should consider it because
Yes,
a lot of work has gone into this and I'm just going to turn it over. I've got Chelsea. You can all come up. You'll just have to bring your chairs and just introduce yourself and then the floor is yours.
Can I say something while we're waiting?
Yeah.
I also think it'd be really helpful, it's either this committee or the education committee to get sort of a report back from the AOE as to like what transformation is happening organically without us doing anything. Because we just talked about EWSD closing the school and moving in middle school, you know, so I think that would be.
There are things going on. I know at caucus it also came up that we're not sure we can hold on to the 77 million to buy down the property tax rates. It will, the intention is to do that. But if they decimate Medicaid, we may be holding our healthcare system together. They decimate food stamps, we may be doing more to feed children. So we won't know until we know what's going to happen. I think we're all just kind of walking on eggs and knowing something really bad could happen. But not knowing what it is and not knowing we don't have enough money to put aside to cover anywhere near what they could cut out from us. So, and that's part of the reason I'm also trying to hold on to some taxing capacity because I may need that to keep any kind of a safety net in place, but we will know that when we know that. So we're going to continue to work on how we go about this process of transforming really our governance and our taxing system. So the hope is we are going to have a more efficient system that will allow us to provide better education across more evenly across the board. I think there's been more than one opinion that the ability to provide education is a mixed bag, that some of schools in poorer communities can't do as well as schools in larger communities. Some of them were told to really well, and I'm trying to get the Department of Ed to come in and talk to us about that. But my sense is they are so short-staffed, and that's before Fed started cutting funding. I hate to pressure them at this point because they, I think, are really just trying to keep their heads above water. And so this is where we are, and welcome.
Thank you. It's good to see you all again. Chelsea Myers, Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendent's Association.
Mike Licklater, I'm superintendent of Hardwick Unified Union School District, and I'm the ESA representative on the commission, along with Senator Cummings. Yes, this is my third year as a superintendent in Hardwick. My 16th year as a superintendent in public education. I moved to Vermont 3 years ago after a career in public education in a district in southeastern Pennsylvania, a district of about 6,000 students. So I have an interest and have enjoyed being in Vermont, and I think that we do a great job with children in the state.
I'm Sheila Soul. I'm superintendent of the Addison Northwest School District. This is my 7th year as superintendent in that district. And as superintendent, I've been also a director of curriculum, a principal, and an elementary educator, and served as a consultant actually for Vermont Institutes back in the early 2000s. So this is my 33rd year in public education in Vermont. And I'm a member of the VSA Trustees Group.
Before we get started on the plan, I always think it's useful to say how this plan came about. We have a board of trustees. They represent all 5 regions. You know those regions very well at this point. And then we have 4 officers also on our board. And so this plan really stemmed from them. We had input sessions with the full membership. But in full disclosure, we do not have 100% consensus on all things all the time. And I think that that's the case in this situation, but it has been approved by our board. And I would say a large portion of the membership likes most of it, if not all of it. So, but there are some that do not.
A good bill. We can arrive at that. We'll
Just want to be transparent that you might hear from superintendents that they don't agree with that, and that's just part of our process. So, yeah.
So to speak a little bit to the introduction, there is agreement in this plan that Vermont must transform education thoughtfully and incrementally, guided by a clear vision that supports all students, looks to the future, and uses resources wisely. Many are discussing change, but there is no clear path or understanding of its impact on students. The current disorganized and politicized debate is not benefiting public education and instead promotes school vouchers and state takeover. We advocate a student-centered approach with clear research-backed goals, and we think this will ensure efficiency and quality moving forward. So this policy framework aims to achieve the following goals: to leverage attainable and research-based scale to address opportunity, equity, and affordability. And so we have some component parts of that based approach.
Yeah, we'll start with instructional scale. The first piece is district scale. That's one component that I think this body has talked quite a bit about. And I think I've talked a little bit in this committee specifically about some of the research behind district scale. So our recommendation is to create a working group for instructional and district scale to guide district consolidation with a clear purpose, increasing student opportunity while realizing maximum efficiency. The composition should include public education and research expertise and have a small enough size to complete its charge in such a short amount of time. The charge shall be to determine the most efficient number of districts and propose district boundaries based on sound research, Vermont's unique landscape, and comprehensive analysis of school locations, conditions, and capacity. District size goals must be data and research driven, not arbitrary, and enhance efficiency, equity, and educational opportunities. The working group will quantify cost savings, identify expanded opportunities for students, and use GIS mapping and other tools to ensure sustainable, equitable outcomes. GIS mapping would show us where all the schools are, what their capacity is, what their condition is, what the sending patterns are, and be able to create a map that is best or most accurate of the current sending patterns and conditions of schools within each area.
That's a question to see if there,
Yeah.
or do you want me to wait till the end? Go ahead. Is GIS mapping, is that something that we would have to contract be a contractual thing, or is there an agency in state government?
No, we have the state map.
We do.
So the Agency of Digital Services has already started that process. What I would say is there's just some data missing, like condition of the schools is not clear in it, the capacity of the schools. And I think with more time, superintendents can help to input that data based on their knowledge of their schools. There just hasn't been enough time to completely populate the necessary information. But I would say they did a great job with what they do have already.
Remember, we had them in last year.
That's
we were
right.
Looking at goals,
Right.
they can get,
Yeah, it's pretty nice, yeah.
it's, yeah,
They're,
get pretty.
yeah,
They're the same people who mapped my place. And they had me living in a barn. And they had the people next door to me having my address. And it goes on and on and on. It was very flawed, to say the least.
oh, okay.
So some of them depends on where you are.
We have that really great school construction sort of database that was put together a couple years ago that maybe could kind of interplay with the GIS mapping somehow.
Yeah, Margaret can put it in.
I think they have some of it, but not the comprehensive
Okay.
on it. Great.
It will take a while.
Yes. And then the CTE governance reform should be factored into the working group's charge rather than treating CTE governance as an independent factor. And I spent a lot of time with BACTED, and I think that they generally agree that it should be comprehensive reforms. And you'll see that later in this plan, we speak to some things that CTE have been asking for years around statewide systems. So I think that that is a move towards better and more efficient systems for CTE as well. And I'll talk about that when we get to there. The working group should consider in its recommendations school size. We'll talk about that in just a second. Eliminate the concept of the supervisory union so that district resources directly support equitable student opportunities and outcomes in an efficient manner. And I think some people might say, Chelsea, well, boards don't cost any money, they're volunteer. What I would say is that central office time can be spent towards other things in a system that is operating with one board. And so questions about the efficiencies related to SUs versus SDs. And then one of the big things that we've been talking a lot about as a superintendent's association is that all of this reform has really not talked too much about contracts or found any resolution around what we're going to do with collective bargaining agreements and other contracts, services, like transportation contracts. I don't know how long you all have transportation services contracts, their central office contracts, CBAs. Any merging activity really needs to think about what that's going to look like to phase into new contracts and what it's going to cost. And then we put out a timeline for that particular work. So in June 2025, the working group is established with its clear charge. And then in December 2025, so very quick turnaround, the working group puts forth a proposal for redistricting based on sound research and analysis. Happy to go through any of that research again at some point. And then from January to May, you all deliberate on the proposals that you've seen. And then from July 26th to 29, necessary actions to move toward new district structures are taking place. And then new districts are in operation on July 1, 2029.
I'm just curious, after last year's commission that brought nothing back to us, are you
Set up.
confident that another now working group can do this work in 6 months?
The differences that I would suggest are between what this is proposing and the commission is that the commission's charge was 6, 7, 8 pages or extremely lengthy and broad and also a huge group of people. And so we are hopeful and optimistic that a smaller, more concentrated charge and set of people in the room with expertise would be able to get this done.
And it was also an 18-month charge, so the first 6 months was just the interim report on cost drivers.
Yeah.
So we still have work that we're currently charged with. We would recommend as an association to really pare that work down to be more focused.
Now, would you, because I know the House bill has that as a subcommittee or working group of this commission. Is that what this working group is, or are you just saying, hey, let's make a new working group that's not part of that?
I think we're pretty agnostic to what it says.
I think remembering the pension, those of us that were here when the pension funding crisis hit, it was Senator Kitchell who said it was a big group. I mean, you know, state employees and teachers and everybody involved, and there was a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And in the end, it was a small group of like 4 or 5 people who sat down and said, this is what we can do.
Hmm.
And that's what happened. I mean, and I think that's what this is envisioning. The commission really wasn't envisioning the kind of crisis moment we were at last year. And so it's kind of large and more theoretical with some, but it's a 2-year time frame or 18 months. It's and this I think is envisioned to be a much smaller group with a much shorter time frame and a more definite work product that is required. And I gather the House has one version.
Yeah.
When it gets here, there'll be, I'm quite sure, another version. And at some point, we'll work it all out.
I just, from my experience in the past, I just know how the legislature likes when people make maps for us and what we do with those maps.
Well, I think we're learning from reapportionment that we will do our maps.
Yeah.
And we will have to own our maps, because we will get beat up over our maps at one level or approved. But I think it's recognized that this is going to have to be primarily legislators that are going to have to work with everybody else, but then take responsibility for the work product. So
I know I don't want to get in a debate with my esteemed colleague from North Chittenden, but saying that the commission produced nothing, I think is a bit of hyperbole. And I also think that it's just not fair. Those were committed people who met many times and did a lot of work. And we'll talk about it offline, but I have an issue with that word, nothing.
well, it has produced what we asked to produce. If there is a fault, it is ours. But it was 10 o'clock at night, the last night of the session, remember?
You always learn something from every experience, so it's not nothing.
We don't always make our best decisions under those
That's
circumstances.
agreed, yes.
Okay, the last thing I'll just say about district scale is that we feel like scale needs to address all parts of the system. including district, school, and the classroom level. But I do want to, and I want to say, because I've been in here talking at one point about district scale research, the central office staff, it makes up, or administration makes up about 5% of the total cost. And so we need it to be more expansive than just district scale. So,
Yeah.
which is why we get into school size and class size as well.
I think the place where we have consistently come up off the charts on any kind of local thing is the paras. I don't think we have a huge number of cafeteria workers. It seems to be the para educators and why our ratio of adult to student in the schools is very high. And that's always been a concern in this building. And it's something we're gonna have to understand. Why do we have so many para educators? What could we do to help alleviate the need for them? What do teachers need? And if you all have any studies.
Well, I would go right back to 173. I think it's the perfect blueprint for what
Okay.
you're talking about, and just needs some more concerted effort for implementation. It's a good piece of best practices in the law.
Okay, that's Act 173?
Yeah,
And the Agency of Education never followed through with their part of that act. So
Okay,
that's on them.
and there are two, one particularly related to the practices report that led to
okay.
that bill.
That's a good question, building on yours.
Yeah,
So minimum class size, yes, that makes sense to me. But I just worry that that's only going to be talking about teachers to students, and it might not get at the paraeducators and support staff professionals. Is that part of this plan? I did read the first 2 pages, but then we started talking.
We can either talk about that now or talk about that when we get to class size, either way. So we will talk about it.
okay, no.
Good question.
Keep going.
It is a good.
So I'll move on then to school size. So we're gonna talk first about school size. So considerations for school size should begin by defining guaranteed opportunities for all students. So what do we want for all learners, and what would then be equitable across all systems? Any consideration of school size minimums must address funding for school construction and renovation. Any proposal that ignores school size fails to significantly address the goals of equity, opportunity, and affordability. So to do this, the legislature must ensure a vision for future-focused, high-quality educational opportunities for all learners. So, knowing what we're trying to build the system to achieve before we set about building it, right? So that vision is very important. Establish a school construction aid program that prioritizes efficient scale. Until the fund is appropriately resourced, we will be limited to the capacity of our existing infrastructure. To have larger schools, we need to acknowledge that we do not have facilities that can currently support necessarily larger student enrollments, right? Also a geographic necessity standard needs to be clearly outlined in law, such that transportation times to the nearest school are clearly defined. And ideal school size and configuration must be used in consideration of district consolidation to realize the types of savings and increased opportunities that have been outlined in proposals to date. So our suggested timeline for that is that no later than June 26th, establish a school construction aid program, and also sunset articles of agreement such that the system can move toward the recommendations of district and school scale. And then through 26 to 29, implement the district and school configurations.
One thing I'll flag in this section too, related to the geographic necessity standard, I think that's super important for you all in this committee when you're thinking about the foundation formula. Because I think, as you all know, the education finance policy needs to align with the goals of the education policy itself. And there's ways in which you all can use the foundation formula to help match or align with the education policy related to scale.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sheila, the sunset articles of agreement, do you mean school district articles of agreement? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That may
Why?
stand in the way of consolidating schools, right? Currently articles, depending on how they're written, may require a vote of the record in order to move forward. We wouldn't be able to necessarily get past that barrier to move into a consolidated future, right? So those articles of agreement are different across different districts and, so we would, in order to, we have to sort of draw a line in the thing and we have to step over it in order to move into this new future where we are considering new configurations.
That would definitely be something I want to talk to the council about, because those articles of agreement are voted on by voters, just like the article, like, they're essentially like a charter check for municipalities. And so I hear you, I know some in our area that are relevant, but I also think that's I mean, we would have to consider that no matter what we do, but it's a big step. Yeah.
What my point was, like,
Yeah.
if we are moving to this regardless, those are gonna have to be reconciled.
Yeah.
If you are going to bigger districts, if you are changing anything related to school, they will have to be addressed at some point.
Yeah, yeah,
For example, in my district, there's a clause that if a school's closed, that the parents are entitled to the next closest school. Well, in some cases, the next closest school doesn't have capacity.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of complications that whether you look at the governor's plan, whether you look at the House plan, the Senate plan, whatever you look at, there's considerations, and I think it's an important consideration that you bring up.
yeah, yeah. It's just to have the legislature annul essentially like locally voted on charters and articles of agreement. Is yes, I mean, but I think that this is the first time I've heard it said it's directly as that, but you're absolutely right. We'd have to do that, but there are legal implications. I mean, some of the older ones are in statute even, so they're
No, my note says, what kind of legal authority do we have around? My gut says that municipalities are creatures of the state,
oh yeah,
and we probably could abolish anything we want if that would be wise. It's another question.
right, we
But
can
we
do it, but
will have to work that through. I know a lot of those articles of agreement after 46 we've done because people feared that their schools were going to be closed by everybody else. And they were the smallest town in the district and they were going to be the big ones. But they have also stopped, the will of the majority in the district on a number of occasions. So absolutely, we are definitely going to have to, we have separate employee contracts. And how are we going to deal with that? I think we've been told there's all kinds of plans and covenants and other legal things that we're going to have to deal with, that this is not just a redeclare and it happens.
I think it's clear too that we don't have any interest in small schools that are small by, like, we don't want you all to create policy that closes schools in rural areas that have nothing for hundreds of miles, and would close down the center of that community, for example. Which is why we think this geographic necessity standard laid out very clearly would be very helpful to education leaders, but just communities themselves. The recognition that some of our schools are small because of our geographic needs.
That has been stated, but you're right, there is no standard which was
Right.
helpful.
It needs to be defined.
So then schools would know. But that.
So moving on to class size minimums are beneficial for both students and teachers, promoting better learning environments and supporting teacher effectiveness. Setting these minimums in statute to be included in the education quality standards and school board policy would leverage existing quality enforcement mechanisms. Class sizes should also limit the number of grades included in multi-age classroom elementary grades. BSA recommends minimums of kindergarten 12 students, grades 1 through 5, 15 students, and grades 6 through 12, 18 students.
This is on average.
On average, yes, average minimums.
So you might have a class that's like 14 in a grade and then one that's like 18, for example. It particularly gets a little bit messy in like middle grades and upper grades that you might have some courses that are, so it's the average.
And then just some considerations for that, intervention services pursuant to Act 173 and multi-tiered systems of support must be excluded from those minimums. Average class size should be calculated by grade band in a building, as defined by the district and as measured at school level. The district level, no more than 2 grades per multi-age classroom
In elementary.
in elementary. And then we recommend demographic studies and report at least every 5 years to inform that. And at this time, it's difficult for us to speak to policy related to staff to students ratios more broadly. And that's really given the inconsistency in definitions of reporting. For example, in many places we contract some of those services, and other places those staff may be considered employees, and how those factor into a ratio would be inconsistent from district to district. So a timeline for that, June 25, the legislature would establish the minimum class size, but then have that be effective July 1, 2026. So we have some time to work toward that. From October 25 through May 26, we would make those FY 27 budgeting decisions based on those minimums. And the Agency of Education would work with schools that are unable to meet the criteria and provide recommendations to the district in the short term and to the General Assembly for the long term. And then moving forward from January 26th to May 26th, the legislature uses the updated criteria relative to staffing levels to create policy to bring Vermont closer to the staff to student ratios across the neighborhood. And by July 1, 26, the class size minimums would be in effect.
So Senator, to your point about ratio, some of there's inconsistency in reporting, and what we recommend this body do is ask the agency to get very clear about that, so you could make policy that is applied equally across the board for situations where like they might contract all of their SLPs in one district and not in the other. And so how are you, how is that applied consistently across? So I think it's certainly within the realm of policy considerations, but I would be concerned about how it's currently defined.
Thank you. To kind of piggyback on Senator Chittenden question, I'm wondering, do other states have minimum class sizes and staff to student ratios in statute? And the reason I'm asking that is that litigation can be a good tool, but sitting on the school board, I know that school districts get sued, and I know that becomes borne by the ed fund, and legal fees add up, and I don't want to create something in statute that is going to easily trigger litigation. And it seems like minimum class size, I mean, that is something that unforeseen circumstances could come in, and student numbers could change, and there's just so many, I just keep thinking of so many scenarios where that could be an issue. So I am wondering if it's something that's typical in other states or not so much.
Chelsea would have to speak.
And I could do some research, that's all,
I
but
don't know.
I am not aware of minimum class size set in statute. What I would say is, like, when you look at the research related to class size, Vermont's not even in that research body, right? Because you're so small. When they're talking about small class sizes, they are talking about anywhere from 15 to 20 as a small class size. And so it's difficult to compare the research element of that to what we have in Vermont. I'm not aware of any states that have a class size minimum. We do have class size maximums in our rules right now, and some staffing rules. So I would have to investigate more about the legal concerns related to that. we do recommend that nuances are pointed out in rulemaking, but.
I do want to draw a little bit of a line between this piece around class size and back to this notion of what we want to see as a vision for all learners. Because if we just leave it to the metrics of class size and we don't think about the quality and the equity that we want for all learners, in my system currently, we have about 240 students in the high school, and we have bare bone minimum of course electives for high school students, and we have class size averages around 10 for many of our classes, which are not even in this alignment. So if we come in better alignment with a policy that only speaks to class size and doesn't speak to opportunity, we could come into compliance with something like this, but it would mean shortchanging our kids even more from that opportunity side of the thing. So there's a really important interplay between school size, opportunity, and class size. And again, when left to sort of local decision makers, that becomes a very emotional decision to sort of say, maybe our kids would have more learning opportunities in different high school, right? That's a tricky conversation to try to have in a local community. It's painful.
You want to speak to Pennsylvania and if there was any staffing?
We did not have minimums, but again, we were in those sizes that are optimum size. So my smallest school elementary school was 350. My high school was 100 students. So you had that scale that we just don't have in Vermont. So that's why I think Chelsea said at the beginning, why you have to look at all of them hand in hand and then have thoughtful policy that guides those decisions for locals, but it's based on that statewide vision for what we want educational opportunities for kids.
I know the current House bill too has like an appeal process, which is the common appeal process for the EQS now. So I don't know if that weighs into that concern, but I would have to do more digging on the legal aspect of that. Keep it moving. The next section is around tuitioning. Absent widespread reform in school construction that would eliminate the reliance on tuitioning, VSA recommends the following steps. And so that's in recognition that we have areas of state that are reliant on independent schools and have a good system going with their local independent school in those areas that geographically need it. So we would recommend to hold private schools receiving public dollars to the same standard as public schools. Limit tuition dollars from leaving the state, except for the case of public schools within 25 miles of the Vermont border, excluding Canada. We excluded Canada given the current realities of what's happening at our borders. And number 3, use school designation as a tool to maintain efficiencies, particularly in the domains of transportation and special education delivery. Ensuring that all students that are in an operating structure that has tuitioning, that they get transportation and special ed services if that is what they're being afforded.
Did you say you excluded Canada? I gather we have one school at least that sends their special ed to Canada.
I would be considerate of like what happens if things continue to change and evolve related
down
to
the borders.
it does. I don't even know if it would need to be to that degree, but I think when we were having this conversation, it was more about trying to keep dollars local, but also to prepare for any future
on that.
You know, there are schools that do in fact have tuition students going to Canada and have for many years, and that's why not. I don't know of any restrictions even in the border chaos there is
currently.
that would affect this.
It's
And
something.
I'd be concerned about doing a blanket prohibition of something that helps kids who can't get what they are looking for closer.
So we will definitely look at that. But yes, border considerations make it more.
Yes. I think the idea is to build a system in our state that can meet the needs of all students and provide the opportunities to all kids within the state.
That would be,
Wouldn't that be
that would be
wonderful?
good. Okay.
And then we have that you make these decisions, right now to support the consolidation efforts, at the district level consolidation efforts. Next is the statewide systems.
So thinking about the work we need to do to consolidate structures, there are some basic foundational structures that need to be addressed. These include, but are not limited to, a statewide school calendar by the Agency of Education after consultation with educators and with consideration of recognition of the diverse cultures represented in Vermont. This should go into effect in FY 27. This is especially important for our parent technical education centers that receive students from many different systems and are trying to juggle, a lot of different students. An appropriation for an implementation of a common financial software system, student information systems, and a structure for the collective bargaining agreements and other contracts within districts.
Did we just try that?
You sure did.
Yeah,
The finance.
yeah.
Yes.
I thought that was like a year or two ago.
Still think it's a good idea,
Yeah.
just the implementation was not super successful at
Okay.
the time.
I'm not sure if it was widespread. I might be a little out of my lane here, but I'm not sure that that was the preferred system to have picked either, which maybe with a little bit more consultation from the field, a different decision might have been made that would have made that a little easier.
'Cause I
And
think-
I think that could be testament to the fact that these things take time, which is why we need to start thinking about it. We don't just buy a financial system, financial software system and implement it on July 1 of any given year. It's a very labor intensive process fraught with error and issues and many things. So if there's one area we need to make sure we're right on, it's probably the money part. So, yeah, it's a heavy lift. So
Because some schools, they were already on that system, right?
that's right. Yep.
And
It was like a phased in
Yeah.
implementation plan. So depending if you were part of that first cohort that went
Yeah.
second, or we were somewhere last in line, so we never even got
Never
there.
got there.
And we're very glad about that because it didn't sound like it was very much fun.
The LACNO system really limits the data that we get from schools.
It limits the data, and same with the student information system. A
Yes.
tremendous amount of time and effort is spent funneling information back and forth from our system to the AOE, and it's created the need for additional positions within a district just to talk to other systems. So there's a lot of work we need to do in that arena. So lastly, consideration for statewide graduation standards tied again to a robust, future-focused common vision for public education. This could be led by the Commission of the Future of Public Education, but that's a body of work that's really important here as well. So the timeline here is next year work on the statewide calendar that would go into effect in the 27-28 school year. During the 25-26 school year, choose the statewide student information and financial systems in a collaborative effort between educators and the Agency of Education. In 2 years' time, implement the statewide SIS, and in 2 years' time, over 2 years' time, I should say, implement the financial system. And then during the 27-28 school year, begin implementation of a new statewide graduation requirement that would begin with the graduating class of 2031. And during the 28-29 school year, negotiation of common bargaining agreements.
Again, going back to the CTE, several of the things that they've asked for is more common systems, a common calendar, statewide graduation requirements, so that there's more seamlessness between sending schools and CTE centers. So those are all things related to the CTE reports that are in here as well.
Can I just say something? I think the statewide graduation standards or statewide graduation requirements, I'm not sure what the difference is, but I think that's a great idea. I think in an odd way, that would quietly build a lot of efficiency across our system and probably save us money and all kinds of things, because having been in the classroom and on a school board, like I've just seen how it's so problematic without that. So I thank you for including that. Now, the future focused common vision for public education in Vermont, that's another story. I think that is clearly not something that we can easily do because we just tried it unsuccessfully or partially or whatever you want to call it. But so I appreciate you calling it out. I just don't.
One of the things I say often about the graduation standards too is like, and this is just my opinion, not necessarily from the VSA, but it puts something tangible to that vision, you know, like if you're thinking about what you want all kids to graduate together, as a cohort of educators, that kind of naturally requires you to create a vision of what you want all students to get, and then you start backtracking from those graduation standards. So I keep saying like it's kind of that tangible piece that can help with the visioning process, which sometimes feels pretty nebulous and is essential, but feels lofty.
But to take one of your questions earlier, there is a common minimum that we see across the country, and that's something we need to have in Vermont. It doesn't mean that you can't exceed that and have something that's unique to a particular school district, regardless if that school district is. But the foundation of requirements is something that's very common. We think is important and critical.
I agree. Thank you.
Why is the calendar portion so difficult to, because I would love to take it one step further and even my childcare. I would love it if, you know, my kids aren't in school yet, but when one's in school and one's in childcare, I'd love for a day where school's closed and daycare's closed. Or if daycare's closed, school's also closed. Cause, you know, I gotta bring one to school, but one's gotta stay home and.
Can I provide you color on that?
Yeah, thank you.
So I was the faculty senate for 10 years and as the president chair of the student affairs committee. I made my bones on the academic calendar. It was a terribly difficult conversation.
Yeah.
You're amazed at how many different factors and contingencies and things you need to consider it. That's just for UVM working with Burlington and then all of our stakeholder groups. Statewide, have every school district have the same calendar. I can expect the same type of headaches.
Yeah,
So I get why it's difficult.
the agreements are really too.
And it's not just education, it's employment and, you know, and this is another thing that's not unique to Vermont. You know, I'm in a community where we had Hershey Park, amusement parks, and then that plays a part into when people want workers. Labor Day, is it before the Labor Day, after Labor Day? So it's not just educators who are having trouble with that common calendar. It really is the outside impacts of our communities and what they need. Ski resorts in Vermont.
I'm pleased to say our board made it their mission this year to try to get the vacations aligned. And I'm pretty sure they were successful. I think we'll wait and see the final calendars come out.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that it was the vacations are aligned. So that's a win.
But what week in February, you like your winter break?
Yeah.
Our community likes it the third week because that's when that's the week after President's Day weekend when the tourists are there.
Yep.
So that's what we hear from our community. So there's all these unique needs that again, it's something that we think is important that's in legislation that gives the directive and then kind of drives those conversations.
But again, just to kind of tie it back to this notion of a future focused vision for public education, I worry a little that we're trying to replicate a very traditional system that still forces us into a similar looking calendar, going to school 5 days a week in a building located somewhere to learn in classrooms and desks, right? Like, is that really going to stand the test of time? Is that future proof? Consider how much the world has changed. So there is an opportunity here not to make this hard task even harder, but to just really think about what we're doing here before we set up a whole system that may not serve us well into the future and meet all of our students' needs. So,
4 day weeks, all year, right?
And then the last section talks about how there's unilateral appointment structure for all the state leadership structures around education. So all of the appointments of the state board and the Secretary of Education. So we are asking for a more diverse appointment structure for the State Board of Education.
we're ready to wrap it up here. So in conclusion, Our proposal did not address funding, for education, but VSA supports a foundation formula most closely resembling testimony from Dr. Tammy Colby. We believe it provides adequate modeling, and needs to rely on implementation that starts from the current state and moves into the future state as described in this proposal. A plan for statewide school construction must happen if we're going to achieve school-based economies of scale. VSA wants to express its unequivocal support of change to our education system that is grounded in opportunity, equity, and affordability. And we ask legislators to be particularly diligent about inducing change that has not explicitly provided evidence and reasoning for improvement across these three pillars.
And I will say that this was written before Dr. Tammy Colby gave her testimony just very recently. And again, I'd just like to emphasize that we hope that the finance policy really closely aligns with whatever you determine with the education policy, and that we create the right incentives for best practices and scale within the finance
I think
at the appropriate time.
we know that we're kind of working with one hand tied behind our back until we know what the government structure is going to be. I think we can say, yeah, we'll find it, a foundation formula. But how that's going to be structured and the size of the districts has an impact on the Brigham compliance and, I'm assuming that the foundation might need to be larger in very small schools that don't have an option to merge. They're by necessity small. So it's all going to come together eventually, but in parts, it won't all come together to me.
I was just gonna say, foundation formula actually can be pretty flexible and be implemented with a variety of different governance structures and district sizes, and to get at some of the differences. You use weights or grants on top of it. So the current proposal in the House would use a grant for sparsity and a grant for school size. So there are ways to get around it. We could implement a foundation formula in our current structure right now. Yeah. So there's no limit. We could do it. Senator Beck and I have talked about it multiple times. It's obviously ideal if we can do the two together, but we can also phase them and do one first. But I don't think we need to hold back on changing our funding formula in order to wait for the school districts or vice versa.
I think especially to, again, that alignment between what you do want for scale, even if it's not implemented at the same time, is recognized, like that it aligns.
Right. And also just to your point about the sort of visioning about where you want to be and what you want every kid to have learned when they exit your school system. Or when they graduate. I was on a school board. That's exactly how we did the sort of, and I'm sure you've done this with your board we did that to sort of, it's kind of, working backwards, saying, okay, when they graduate, backward design. When they graduate, this is what we want them to have experienced and what we want them to have learned and the opportunities we want them to have had. And then how do we create that? And it's a fun process. It's not something that the legislature is actually set up to do. That's not how our process works at all. So I don't think we are the appropriate body to do that.
I think it's important that we ensure that's driving the school process in some fashion, right? Otherwise, how do we know we got there?
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
not sure what we're actually trying to accomplish. I think we're trying to accomplish something more than just an affordability mission.
I would hope so. But again, is it the superintendents? Is it the commission? Is it whose job is it to do that sort of forward working design? It's multiple organizations and people and entities. But our structure, how a bill becomes a law, Right. Doesn't really fit into that kind of,
Right.
Sure.
process.
State Board of Education would have to be involved in that.
I mean, in
Yeah.
many ways, the commission
A
has the right
functional-
representation.
Equitable, diverse State Board of Education, I would
Yes.
say that current one is maybe not the right one.
Yes.
And it needs to be done. I think right now there's always an eye on cost. Sure. And probably we should do that. And then go to the cost and then go to what can we do? Because I'm pretty sure we're not gonna be able to do everything that we should do and we want to do, at least initially. But we'll see. Committee, other questions, considerations?
A couple of observations as I look at the conclusions. The decisions of what we are asking to be done, I'm just wondering if we've asked for the right things. The three things that come out to me that I don't see mentioned very much here are quality in terms of the end result, accountability for ensuring that if we don't achieve it, we have the means to make some changes to see that it is achieved, and cost effectiveness. Those are kind of high on my list. Don't really see that. Maybe I'm just reading the words differently. Maybe they mean that, but I don't quite see it.
I think that scale does address cost effectiveness and quality, speaks to the different instructional capabilities when you have a bit more scale at class size, and Sheila and Mike could talk to that perhaps a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, again, to the point of without the school size scale, it's difficult for us to consider adding any programs for our students. We're already at bare minimum, right? So I think that the scale speaks pretty well to that quality piece.
And I also know there's questions about class size and those minimum class sizes, but when you look at what's offered, it's why they all go hand in hand. And class size impacts what we can offer, size impacts what we can offer. So I think in that sense that we are talking about cost effectiveness, especially with the difference in formula and kind of the process by which we approve
And maybe
budgets.
it's the way that I'm looking at how things are summarized. If the top line is class size and so on, I get to, well, what are we trying to do? Why are we doing this? And it's those top line reasons that might drive cost side, it might drive size, it might drive employment density, it might drive administrative overhead, it might drive a whole bunch of things, but they're under that, underlying or under what it is we're actually trying to do. And we want a system that has high quality. We want a system that has accountability to ensure that whoever's doing it is doing what we want done and achieving results. And then also cost effectiveness.
Yeah.
Not necessarily cheapness, but cost effectiveness, so that
Yeah.
we're getting a value in the investment.
I think some of that comes too, which is maybe reading between the lines too, is like where these things are situated, right? So we talk about the education quality standards, and we talk about graduation standards, and we have the accountability structures in place. We're tied back to those things, and it's just going to have to be reinvigorating that accountability structure aligned with the things that we're asking for the graduation standards and the whatever's worked into the education quality standards. We do have those processes in the state of Vermont, and they really just need to be tied into this whole effort. So I think it's an excellent point.
Mhm.
Needs to be
When I
part of
see
it, for
things,
sure.
that are reported back that our test scores are have been consistently falling for a number of years. That to me, when you look at quality, that raises a big red flag, and also does on basic investment. Why are you investing in something that is not doing what is it we're intending it to do?
And I think it's important to look at items like test scores. That's always been a big focus of mine. I also can tell you that the schools I see and the teachers that I see teaching our students are some of the highest quality that I've experienced in my career. When you take a look at standardized testing, I think there's other pieces that we can talk about with the role of Agency of Education, the State Board of Education, But there's also an impact of the last 5 years of COVID. There's an impact of what we actually are testing and how the current tests were developed. That there was no content mapping that was done when the agency moved to this new system. So there's a lot of questions that I think it's important. They're important questions to raise, but I do see a high quality product coming out of Vermont already. And how do we make that even better?
And I would think that for us around this table, one of our jobs is to make sure that the agency is adequately staffed to do the job that we need them to do. I haven't gotten that sense in a long time that if we want education quality standards and graduation standards enforced, and we want teachers to do well, we need to have an agency that has the ability to provide the training that teachers need, to provide the support to help schools figure out alternatives to the way they're doing things. I'm encouraged to hear there's a couple $1 million in the budget to hire some staff. I'm hoping maybe there'll be some more to help with this transition, because we have an obligation to supply the schools with our side of the deal, so that they can function, because I don't think individual schools necessarily have the ability to know the latest technique in modifying student behavior or in teaching math. And I've gotten complaints from teachers and parents that, we teach math one way this year, and then somebody new comes in and we're going to teach it that way next year. And, we've changed the testing standards. And so how do we judge? I get all kinds of feedback if I say anything about standardized tests. Well, we don't do that. So how do we know if we're achieving what we want to achieve? And we need some consistency
That's
over
the issue.
time.
That's the issue of accountability that I'm talking about. And then it always begs the question that when you have a particular school or district that is not achieving what you want, what do you do about it? What do people in charge do about it, and do they do it in a timely fashion?
The Department of Ed had
I just
the
asked the
ability to
question.
take over, didn't they?
Yeah, that's embedded in the education quality standards and the new district quality standards. They are building an accountability framework for the district quality standards, back to the point around the capacity of the agency to fulfill that end of the vision. That has been somewhat problematic. We've had some things in place to measure that accountability that have somewhat fallen apart over time. So it's an important aspect of it, and it is somewhat missing. So I don't disagree that is an important part of the change process, but also I think the commonality or the lack thereof across systems makes it hard to draw those comparisons as well. So the more we can get on the same page so that, the inputs and the outputs can sort of be similar, then we can really start to drive that change.
What we do need a coherent and consistent statewide technical assistance and training, which we do not have right now.
Yeah. And there have been times in the past when the agency was a much more key player in that work.
Thank you. We had a witness come in to this committee this year to speak to us about foundation formulas, and she kind of pointed out the obvious, but I think it's worth repeating that education is the largest line item and often in a state government, and it's one of the largest bodies of programmatic work that a state government has. The agency of education, in terms of accountability, is accountable for our education system, whether we fail or whether we succeed. They are accountable, and they should be held accountable, and they should be properly resourced. But when a school is failing, there's nothing that says the agency of education can't provide support. And scaffolding or whatever is needed to help that school thrive. And we don't have that now. And it's a problem.
We used to have it. When I was on the school board, I know that the Agency of Education used to do that. When a school didn't meet the education quality standards or didn't meet certain test score thresholds, they got support from the Agency of Education. There was a plan made for the school. There was consultants hired. There were people who came in and did training and evaluation. That has not happened in the past 10 years under this governor. Period.
I think that is our job to ask the hard questions.
I'm gonna make my general plug for addressing healthcare and housing.
Oh my gosh.
And,
Yeah.
We're working on health.
as well. And I know you're gonna be looking, or you have looked at the budget. And we'll just make a plug for PTE, because that is a cost driver. That some schools are really struggling right now, and the state made a promise to those schools that they would be supporting remediation. So
Yes.
appreciate you letting me go off topic for a second, but I had to make that
That's
plug for my superintendent. to tell you about that.
We are going to have to come up with some money for school construction or just necessary maintenance. I don't, from what we've heard, schools can't get bonding requests voted in, and so we have a lot of deferred maintenance to the point where we have, that would bet some fairly deteriorated schools. And we have an obligation to do something about that. Hopefully, we can have a rational decision or discussion about the costs, because we are going to have to invest money. This is not going to happen without the public investment. And over time, we and our kids especially will be better off, but it's good. We can't do it on the cheap. So I know Chittenden County's built, but the rest of the state is in bad shape. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
appreciate your questions.
for hard work, and we thank for laying all the things we need to do out.
You guys have the hard job now.
Yes. We appreciate the work you're doing.
Yes. Appreciate it.
Thanks
Maybe we
again.
can
Thank you.
come up with a revised agenda for that commission. Okay. Committee, that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
We could have some
Thank you.
committee discussion about what we've heard. A lot of this is in education and their jurisdiction, but
Yep.
we are going to have a discussion about how do we make decisions about school construction, where things get located. How, I mean, as far as I can figure out, the idea is that the schools will bond to do what needs to be done, and then they will rely on the state to give them money to make some or all of their bond payment. That's, and I'm not even sure where I've heard that, but that's the impression. Do you
That's
know
a
any
big
more
number.
than I do?
That's a big number, right? For that much
It's a
comes from.
huge number. But we're gonna have to deal with those numbers and with the reality, because
Yeah.
there's a limit to what we can consolidate until we expand or build something. We can do some consolidation, but you can't close a school unless you can put all the kids in that school somewhere else. And hopefully somewhere else better, where they will have better opportunities, or it's not gonna fly.
I think the reality is you can't afford to have excellent school facilities in a 3.6, 3-to-1 staffing ratio in a state with average tax capacity.
Right.
Just can't do both.
Okay,
So what's the answer?
If you want to have some facilities, you gotta have fewer staff in the buildings.
But you have to have the facilities that can hold the children first. That's the problem is there's a the chicken and egg thing.
I know, but we're staffed at 3.63 to 1. We're never gonna come up with the money to make a shift.
so
There's no way around that.
it's gonna need to be staged. We're gonna need to start doing what we can where we can, I think. But we're gonna have to come up also with a stage plan for building and consolidating, and we're gonna have to let people know that this is what's going to happen and this is what it's going to cost. And this is what we're going to contribute. And we need, I think, to look at the different roles of the state board. I did vote against putting them on the government.
Thank you.
Hopefully the foundation formula, I know the frustration in this building is palpable. When we get beaten up for raising taxes that the voters actually raised. But I think we're inclined to make the same mistake we made with the state colleges, which is just saying, well, if you spent less, life would be good. And I think with both, we've probably come to the breaking point, and we need to acknowledge that there is a funding problem, and how do we move our way out of that.
I just wanted to say one quick thing about school construction now that I've been on those two committees, and I do have to say, the AOE has done some really great work around school construction. And they have a good bird's eye view of the system, and they have that assessment of all the buildings in the state, and they have a, sort of a priority system in place.
Let's see if AOE can come in.
It would be interesting to hear
school
from them.
construction. Because that's going to need to be paired with districts and district sizes.
And our work never got to that next point of like, where do the schools need to be and which one, like, we never got to that stage, but that would be the next.
That would be the next one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think those are decisions that we have to make. We don't have to decide where a school goes.
I don't either. That's why.
Yeah,
We should
I mean,
hear from the
there-
AOE.
There's a,
It's gonna have to be a mix.
but that's not the legislature's job to decide where to build a school. That is,
If we're paying for
Whose
it.
job is it?
doesn't the bill S-39 set up a structure for how that happens? And that bill S-39, the provisions of that bill are in the House Education bill that's coming to us.
Okay.
They include those provisions in the bill, so that, there's a structure for making
That's why I think it would be good to hear from the.
Yeah,
AOE,
I
because
agree.
they own the structure.
Yeah,
They have.
exactly. I agree, but it's not something, we don't pass a bill to say like, build a school here. We pass bills to set out to create the structure, to create the system for doing it.
We have always approved school construction funding.
Funding, but I'm saying, not we're
The
putting
system
a
goes
building here and it's gonna
Yeah.
have this many kids in it, and this is the architect, and this is the contractor and all that stuff. That is done by somebody else. The funding structure, sure, we create the scaffolding for other people.
When we did school construction, there were guidelines.
Absolutely guidelines, absolutely.
Bob Donahue is at the AOE, who's done a lot of the work.
Okay, that will be good to hear from, because then we know what we need to fund. Okay. Anything else? Anyone know how to do a school calendar?
Yes.
I've been-
Just say there's classes before Labor Day and there are no classes after Memorial Day and That's it.
No, there's so much more to it.
I know, but that's all we need to do.
After,
Such
you
a
know,
short
now that's
That's fine.
after Memorial
Kids
Day.
don't learn anything in classrooms in August.
Germans
That
have
is a
235
hangover
days of school.
from being a
Just saying.
rural farming state.
Some towns use
That's
schools.
just, you get out
And that
mid to
differ
late
creates a lot.
June. We
Well,
moved
you
to
get a
Kentucky,
different vendor.
got out
Are we off
in
live or are we
mid-May,
still?
I'm still
because
on.
the kids were needed on.
I'm
the farm.
gonna leave them.
The kids aren't needed on the farm.
In Germany, they have 235 days of school.
I was gonna say, I mean, that whole summer's off is a,
Yeah, they don't have the summer that we have,
well,
and they have
Others-
longer breaks throughout the year.
Yeah.
Much longer breaks.
and others are not home. I mean, that's, what do you do with the kids if they're not in school, but their mothers are working or their fathers are working?
Oops.
Oh, right.
Where I live,
I
I
have
mean,
all kinds of systems.
yeah, I mean, that's, well.
We still
yes.
on the line.
We're still on.
Are we all-
They have time to go. I suggested maybe.
Okay, we can adjourn